get my head around that Mossad, one of the most capable agencies in the world, didn't see it coming. How did it happen? Or even the Israeli army. I think they are well equipped and they are super informed. How could this surprise attack happen? Did it happen like we saw it on the telly?
I don't know. I think that part of it is that Israel has been very focused, and with good reason, on Hezbollah, because Hezbollah really is dangerous. I mean, if you provoke Hezbollah, they are capable of inflicting enormous damage. It would take the entire Israeli Defense Force, Air Force, all their capabilities to deal with Hezbollah. And so as a result, I think they have tended to view Gaza as less of an existential threat. And I think they underestimated what was going on over there. I don't think they interpreted events properly. There's a certain amount of arrogance and hubris involved.
Yeah, possible. So, what's your take on China? Is there any chance that China will use the situation of a declining hegemonic power of the US and invade Taiwan, or you think this is out of?
No, that's nonsense. China has serious internal problems right now. But it also, the problem is that we tend to project onto China European norms. In other words, we pretend as though the clock has stood still since 1910, that powers will behave as they did then. China is the last country in the world that wants a war. China has now recovered from its century of humiliation, but it has a long way to go. They have enormous problems inside the country with corruption. I mean, they've had to jail people that were responsible for the shipyards, for building hulls that were fundamentally flawed. They have general officers that have been stealing whatever they possibly could get their hands on. Xi has done everything in his power to jail or sometimes execute these people. He's trying to do something, and that is he wants to feed, shelter, and protect his population. He's got 1.4 billion people. And I've been to Northeast Asia, and as I tell people all the time, when Xi wakes up every morning, he's not worried about the United States. He's worried about how do I hold 1.4 billion people together? And I think the Chinese population knows that. He also knows historically dynastic change in China results when the population can't eat or when the population is attacked and defeated. The Chinese military fails. So he's not looking for a fight by any means. And as far as Taiwan goes, and this is very exasperating because I deal with this all the time. First of all, if China were to attack Taiwan, it would destroy its relations with everybody in Asia. China wants to do business with everyone in Asia. China is competing economically, particularly in Southeast Asia and South Asia, with Japan. If it engages in that sort of thing, it loses immensely overnight. Secondly, Xi came to San Francisco, and I think he was very clear on the points concerning what China would and would not do. And he made it very clear. If Taiwan doesn't declare independence, we're not going to intervene because we have a schedule. We're looking at 2040, 2046 was the last one that I heard about for a reunification. They also know that you have a system on Taiwan, different parties, and right now it's coalesced into two. The one that's been ruling, which is historically pro-Japanese, and the others who are historically pro-Beijing. Now, people think that this coalition of pro-Beijing parties is going to win, in which case they would vote themselves into the Chinese nation. Again, go back to Hong Kong. Look at what happened in Hong Kong. We had a very one-sided picture. My oldest son was in Hong Kong at the time watching everything. He kept calling me. He said, for every Chinese they show you on the television who is screaming freedom and democracy, there are 10 that say these people are idiots and need to be deported. But we never heard from them. Xi never intervened in Hong Kong. Everybody said, he's going to go in there. He's going to mass forces. No, this man is not Mao. That's not his purpose. He wants stability, predictability. He wants prosperity. So all of this about China needs to go away. We need to stop talking about it. You know how many nuclear-powered submarines the Chinese have? Well, the last count was 6. They may have lost one in the Sea of Japan, so they may be down to 5. This is not a nation that, in terms of maritime power, can really compete. China is historically not a maritime power. Japan is. And Japan is a serious superpower in waiting and never gets any credit for it. And we cannot militarize our relations with Asia anymore. In fact, we need to demilitarize them. They're really about doing business, not about making war.
Talking about military, do we have to expect more wars in the future?
Only if we continue to be as stupid as we are. Now, when I say we, I'm talking about the United States. America has this wonderful ability to stay out of things. I would argue the greatest single mistake that we made in our history was to intervene in the First World War. And the reason we did it is very simple. We had opened our credit markets to the British and the French. The British and the French were losing the war. The creditors came to Wilson and said, we're going to be bankrupt. Everything's going to fall apart if we don't win this war. We've got to go in and rescue the British and the French. Should never have done that. This was a war of great powers against other great powers, imperial powers against other imperial powers. Most Americans by 1910 were furious that we'd stayed in the Philippines. You recall we won the Spanish-American War. Then we made the decision to stay in the Philippines. Why? And we ended up killing 250,000 Filipinos who had fought for their freedom from the Spaniards and thought that we would simply liberate them and go home. I mean, this is, I can't even begin to tell you the insanity of the 20th century. And we're coming out of this, but we're not out of it yet. But I think that we have a good chance of escaping from it in the next decade, depending upon who ultimately rules the country. Back to your original question, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that the American electorate, I think, has pretty much had it.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, same in Germany. But I asked this question because our defense secretary, Boris Pistorius, just said to the public of the German public that we have to get ready for war. So that's why I was shocked, because I never heard something like that in the last 10, 20, 30 years. So if our defense secretary prepares us for war, what is he planning to do? Because I think the German army is like a shadow of itself. And I think we spent everything for Ukraine. There is nothing left, no ammunition, no wars, no tanks, no Leopards. So what do you think is behind this speech he gave to the public in Germany?
It sounds as though he was handed talking points by Washington.
Okay, you think he's a puppet of Washington, and he has, like Boris Johnson?
Isn't everybody in Europe right now?
Yeah, we are. So how can we emancipate ourselves away from our big brother in the States?
Look, that's a question you have to answer. I think you need to go to the polls. At least you have elections that are cleaner and fairer than we do. You have a shot. But someone has to have the guts, the courage to stand up and say enough is enough. We Germans are going to chart our own course, and people will be horrified. You'll have my generations, oh, no, we can't do that. That's dangerous. That's nonsense, and I think what they have to do is decide, where do they want to fit in? How do they want to fit in? Doesn't mean that you're going to have hostile relationships with anybody. There's no real reason for it today. But you've got to take control of your own destiny. That's the problem. And I think you must. And I welcome any attempt by the Germans to do that. And I had this conversation privately before I was finished in my short time in the last administration. And depending upon who is elected, you could have a very receptive audience to that. Because I think, again, this is a different generation. People are well beyond the Second World War. And we need to be.
Yeah, definitely. Colonel Macgregor, it was a pleasure talking to you, and it was so much insights and interesting talking points. So thank you very much for your appearance and for the first time on a German channel. And I would love to talk to you again. But please tell our audience where they can find more about you or follow you.
Well, I've just become the chief executive officer for something called Our Country, Our Choice. So if you go to that on the internet, ourcountryourchoice.com, just write it as one word. This is a group of people. I was not a founding member. They asked me to come in, and I've done it. But this is a group of people that said, we're tired of going to the polls, and it doesn't make any difference who you vote for. You get the same bad policies. So they said, we want a third way. We want an end to these overseas interventions that have done us no good, are a complete waste of time and money, and simply cultivate more enemies. That's number one. Number two, we want to defend our own borders. We want to close this border inside our country. We want to restore the rule of law. We want it enforced, an end to the criminality that is spreading all over our large cities and now into the rural areas. In other words, we want teeth in law enforcement. We want to expel the illegals. We want to crack down on the drug cartels. But we want to do these things at home. Then beyond that, we want to stop the sexualization of our children, which we absolutely abhor that is happening with this current government. And there are other things. I mean, they're all very domestically oriented. And we think we've already had a lot of inquiries from people in Sweden, the French, some in Italy, a lot from India. So it's very interesting. You find as you look around the world, a lot of people have the same views, that we all have a great deal of work to do inside our countries, inside our own societies, and that we have to stop this business of destroying our own culture, our own identity, our own way of life on the assumption that somehow or another everything that happened before we came along was wrong. Absolutely not. It needs to stop. That doesn't mean that we think we're perfect. It doesn't mean that we don't admit to mistakes. But on the whole, we haven't done badly. And of course, this was the message I was trying to send to the Germans. You know, this obsession with this short period of history. And it needs to end, not be forgotten. Of course not. You don't want to forget anything. But you need to have a broader perspective.